Hi, I'm Claire Mitchell, QC. Welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. I'm a lawyer who specialises in miscarriage of justice cases, and we're bringing you this podcast because we want to tell you about the women who were accused, prosecuted, convicted, and ultimately executed as witches in Scotland.
I'm Zoe Venditozzi, and I'm a writer who's always had an interest in the witches, and I feel that this dark mark against Scotland needs a reckoning.
The campaign Witches of Scotland wants three things. Firstly, a pardon for all those convicted of witchcraft. Secondly, an apology for all those who were accused as witches. And finally, a national monument in recognition of all those who are affected by this terrible miscarriage of justice.
Over the forthcoming weeks, we'll be talking to a whole host of experts about the history and the modern day connections to the Witches of Scotland. Hello and welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. It'll be no surprise to our regular listeners to know that today's episode is number 58 in our 6-episode series. Claire, hello.
Hello, Zoe. How are you?
I am fine. Thank you very much for asking. What's going on with you?
Well, do you mean what's going on with me personally, or do you mean what's in the news?
Well, I was trying to do it in a slightly more subtle way today, but yes, Claire, what's in the news? What's going on?
First thing in the news is that on the 21st of May, we are going to be in Glasgow at I Write, doing a great live show with Jenny Fagan about her new book, Hex.
Yes, this is very exciting. And my understanding is the ticket sales are going very well, but there are still tickets left. So if you want to come along, have a look on the I Write links and you'll find tickets for it. So it's cool actually, because it's you and me. We're going to be interviewing Jenny Fagan on stage. Now, Jenny Fagan is a very celebrated Scottish author, and she is tackling the issue of the witch trials in her latest book, which is, I guess it's a novella called Hex, where she's writing particularly about one particular witch, in inverted commas, from history, and about links to sort of the modern day with that one, which I think is pretty interesting. So that'll be good. And Jenny's always really good and interesting to listen to. So I think that'll be a great event, actually.
Yeah, what I'm looking forward to is that not only do we get to speak to Jenny about her book, but we've got an opportunity to ask people if they want to ask us anything and want to ask Jenny anything about her book. So that'll be quite fun if we build in some time for people to ask questions.
Oh yeah, definitely. We'll definitely be doing that. I think that'll be really fascinating. So that'll be good. That's next Saturday, the 21st of May, in Glasgow, in the Mitchell Library, in the theatre in there. So please do get tickets and come along and listen to Jenny Fagan talking about Hex, but also there'll be a chance to talk to us too, if you wanted to do such a thing. I mean, why you would, I don't know really. You would have thought the amount of burbling you and I do on this podcast would put people off wanting to start a conversation with us, but you never know. There might be somebody that's lonesome and wants to talk to us, but that'll be good. I'm looking forward to that. So that might be the opportunity to meet lots of people we've not actually met IRL before.
Yes, IRL. Yes. The next thing in the news, and it's an annoying thing for us, is that
annoying, yeah.
There has been a batch of merch which has gone out. Some people thought perhaps it might be magic mugs they'd been sent. It's gone out, and unfortunately, instead of having our branding on it, it's completely blank, which is, I know, highly annoying. So
just to be really clear here, the mug production and the merch production generally is not done by Claire and myself. You might be surprised to know, seeing as we're such a 2-woman band, that is one thing that we don't actually do ourselves. So Claire and I aren't sitting at home hand painting mugs. So it's not us that's done it wrong.
Although at this rate, we might have to start hand painting mugs. What we've done is we've contacted the company that deals with the merch, and we've told them that we'll switch off our merch until they get this sorted. But if anybody has got a mug which is blank, please contact fanhelp@spri.ng. So the second word looks as if it spells spring, but it's fanhelp@spri.ng. And we know some people that have already done that, and they've got back to them and they've just refunded them by PayPal, and they don't have to send the mugs back. So please do that. Bring it to their attention by emailing that address and obviously asking for a full refund. and you don't have to get involved with, having to box up things and send them back, 'cause that's such a hassle. So we're really, really sorry that that's happened to anyone, and please do chase it up, because we obviously don't want you to have to be buying blank mugs, because that's not what you ordered.
No, that's not ideal.
And once we get it all sorted and they confirm it's all sorted, we'll switch the merch back on again.
Fantastic. Okay, because we really do appreciate when people buy the merch, because the money doesn't go to us, it goes towards lovely David, who is doing the sound recording. And I mean, just to be really clear, we don't get a massive markup on the merch either. I think if Claire and I were to actually buy a whole bunch of mugs from Poundland and paint them ourselves, we'd probably make a bit more on it to give to David. But it is really great that there's anything that's going to David. I feel really increasingly terrible about the amount of labour David is doing for us.
Yeah, well, we should feel increasingly bad today, because we're recording this obviously as we do in advance, and David's going to be editing this today on his birthday. So happy birthday, David. Happy
birthday, David. We raise a virtual white mug to you. Thank you.
Just a completely plain white mug.
Completely plain, yes.
Oh,
we could try and sort of spin that and say that it's like a metaphor for the innocence of those accused.
I like that, but I think
a cynical marketing move, I think.
Yeah. Most people that have ordered them would prefer it to have the logo on it that they've chosen.
Fair enough. So apart from that, what were you up to yesterday, dear Claire?
Well, fantastically, I went up to Brechin, and I am embarrassed to say that, in fact, I have never been to Brechin before. And it is a beautiful place. It really is. A lot of really old buildings. There's a beautiful bit on the water. Really lovely. But I didn't just go there for a tourist visit. I went there because yesterday, on the 14th of March, a new memorial was unveiled. This memorial is for people who were either accused or killed as witches, and it names them. So it was fantastic. We got there and we were told about this by Judith Langland Scott, our friend of the show, and she did an episode about Witches of Forfar, episode 30, and she is going to come, Zoe, and do an episode catching up on the Witches of Forfar, but also she's been investigating some people that were accused as witches in Brechin. So she's going to come and tell us that. So what was really good yesterday was there was a good turnout for the unveiling, and in particular the local MSP, Mary Gudgeon, who is Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and Islands. She was there, and she is really interested in the history of women and the story of those accused of witchcraft. So she came along afterwards. There was tea and sandwiches and scones available for folks. So very nice, yeah.
The scones.
Nice scones, you say? Yes, you didn't know about that, Zoe. I get all the perks.
Yeah. If you hadn't noticed me, the scone side of it, I might have been able to rearrange my child's birthday.
But she is really, really interested, really supportive. And also, we have to give a big shout out to someone else who was there, who was Councillor Jill Scott. And Jill came up to me when I was there and talking to some folk, and she said, I listened to the podcast. So thanks very much. We're glad to hear that, Jill, and we hope you enjoy this particular episode. So thanks for supporting us and for being there, and thanks for being involved in this great project to memorialise those people killed as witches. What we'll do later on, we always do our part, as you know, Zoe, about remembering the people as witches, and what we've asked Judith to do is if she wouldn't mind coming on and talking a bit about them, as I said, in the future. So what we're going to do today is we're going to, at that part in the show, remember those who are memorialised at Brechin, but later someone's going to come on and tell us the story of those accused at Brechin. So we'll do that in a bit.
Great stuff. Okay. And there was something else. There was another news article that you wanted to mention.
Oh, I wanted to mention the news article about infamous spoonbender Uri Geller.
Yeah, now we've talked about this off and on this week, and Claire just really wanted to say infamous spoonbender, I think, yes. in this. What was the other thing you said? Cutlery
interferer.
Cutlery interferer, yeah.
He's just bending those spoons using his hands. That's what really annoys me. It's like
Does anybody want their spoons bent ever? What is the purpose in bending a spoon?
Also,
Unless you're going to bend the bowl part of the spoon so I can get more custard in my mouth in delivery.
yes.
What's the point of bending the spoon?
Now, we should ask Yuri, we should say, look, see this like bending the thinnest part of the spoon? We want...
Do you think we're mugs?
Let's not talk about mugs, Zoe. It's still a sore.
Yeah, sorry, it's too soon. It's too soon. So anyway, Uri Geller has bought an island, as many of us will know, off the coast of Scotland, and it is called Lamb Island, I think. Is this correct? Yes. So it's a lamb island, and it's uninhabitable. It's described as a rocky outcrop near North Berwick in East Lothian. So apparently in the past, he's spoken about there being suspected Egyptian treasure hidden on the island, because as we know, the Egyptians did a quick detour up to East Lothian when they were building their empire. And he has now revealed, dun, 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 that there's traces of what's described as witch bones, which allegedly scatter the surface. Geller, 75, told metro.co.uk, hundreds of years ago, there were witches in Scotland and England, and we all know what happened to them. Well, in point of fact, they weren't witches, Yuri, but carry on. And there were witches near North Berwick, where my island is. The rumour of these witch bones emanated from a very important person, so I can't say who, but they say there are remnants of these witches on Lamb Island. I've never spoken about this before, ever.
Just stick to cutlery, Yuri. Leave it alone.
I hope he's not going to start bending bones. He bought the island from an entrepreneur called Camilo Agassiz Pereira for £30,000. And he's basically, one good thing is in this article, he has praised Nicola Sturgeon for apologising to women on International Women's Day, of course, on the back of our campaign. And he said, so that's very good. It's a good thing in history. But I think he's a wee bit confused about the issue of them being like just people that were accused. So I don't really know. It doesn't say very much else really about what the bone situation is.
Yeah, well, I have questions.
Actually, very lacking in detail, this article altogether. So is he saying that there's like bits of human bones scattered on the island? Or is it just like it is in the Howth graveyard, where Claire and I have been many times to have our photograph taken, where there are bits of human bones strewn about there, but that's because rabbits have dug them up and you can see like, bits of spine or like what looks like a finger bone or something lying around. Is it that? If it's uninhabitable, how did the bones get there? This just sounds like a lot of hooey.
Yeah. He is just saying, oh, there were witchcraft trials in Scotland. There were witches. I've bought some rock for 30 grand, and now I'm going to get some publicity off it by tenuously attaching it to the witchcraft trials.
Do you think he's planning on like getting people out there on boats to go and feel the vibes?
I don't know. Please don't give him any ideas.
Well, he apparently lives in Israel, so I'm not really sure like what the story is. I don't think he's planning on building like a little bothy or anything on the island. It's just really weird.
I suppose if he's bought, some kind of rocky outpost for 30 grand, he's not going to say, I've just bought a rock, there might be some rabbit shit on it.
He might say, as well as rabbit shit, there's also witches' bones and Egyptian treasure.
Do you know what I think he might be doing? I think he might be, he's got to have a lot of cutlery that's unusable just now. And he probably needs somewhere to store them all. Yeah.
So maybe he's sprayed all the spoons gold and is pretending that that's Egyptian
treasure. I think that's a live possibility.
Oh, honestly, it's just daft. But I am glad that he recognises the apology and thinks that that's a good idea. So that's something, I suppose.
That's good. But stop calling them witch bones. If there are any bones in that island, the only bones there will be are, either human or mammal or fish, but not witch.
They might be like, how sometimes when they find bones in Scotland on the shoreline and people think it's a human, but actually it's seal bones, like seal flipper bones. They look like human. Yeah, it's probably that. I've watched enough TV to know this nonsense. So that's the news for this week. So going back to Brecon, Claire, shall we name the people that are on the memorial that was unveiled yesterday?
Yes, we should probably see what the memorial looked like, in fact.
We've put pictures up on Facebook, I think, and maybe on Twitter. Worth seeking out the picture, isn't it?
It's just a very plain granite stone. It probably comes up to a sort of just above your knee level in terms of height. And it's got the names of the people recorded on it, which is really, really great. So the memorial records the names of those who were accused of witchcraft in Brechin. They were Marat Merchant, Janet Cooper, and Catherine Skier. They know that those three people were accused and executed.
And then there's a list of people who received what's described as non-capital punishment. So we know from previous guests that that might mean somebody being banished and having to leave town. And then, of course, they would turn up somewhere else and there'd be a bit of gossip, I'm sure, about that. So I don't know, it would be interesting to trace people that had non-capital punishment if anything happened to them further along the line. I'm not sure how we do that. But anyway, on the Brechin Memorial, those people that did not receive capital punishment were James Shanks, Thomas Kinnear, John Christison, Isabel Remy, and Thomas Humble. And then there's a list of people that says those below, their fate unknown. And they were Janet Gardner, Janet Cooper, John Donaldson, Isabel Fordell, Catherine Walker, and Elspeth Gray. And these all happened, I think it's worth mentioning, most of them were sort of like 1649 and 1650, but there is one that I think it says 1618 and one that says 1659. So there were a couple of outliers at the beginning and the end of that as well, but there was clearly a spate of accusations.
And what we know from Judith Langland Scott, who'll come to us and speak about this, is that isn't in fact a complete list of people. There are some more. And interestingly enough, she has discovered a link with her family line and one of the people who are not on the memorial. But they're not stopping there with regards to remembering these people. And in fact, apparently there's going to be a pamphlet and also a notice board, so other names may be added as they're found.
Great. Okay, so we remember those people from Brechin and we'll have Judith on in the future to talk a bit more about it. Okay, so our guest today is actually very exciting. And actually, Claire, it's quite Hollywood, isn't it, our guest for today?
It's very now and very Hollywood.
Because the person we're going to talk to today, so you may remember from the origin story of the Witches of Scotland campaign and podcast, that Claire and I met and bonded over a love of true crime. So anybody that is interested in true crime will probably know who this person is, because you will probably have watched the documentary series, The Staircase, which has now been made into a drama that is on, I believe, Sky. I've not watched it yet, but I'll be very interested to see what that's like, starring Colin Firth and Toni Collette. And you'll probably know that it's a story about a man that was accused of killing his wife when she was found dead at the bottom of their staircase. It's a really interesting, there's 2 documentaries, I think, and it's really interesting because it really goes into the ins and outs and the legal side of everything, and it follows all the court cases and so on. Really worth looking at. And our guest today is, in fact, David Rudolph, who it was the lawyer for the man that was accused in the staircase. So Claire, you knew of him before, didn't you?
Yeah, we've had David Rudolph over to Scotland before to do a talk for us, and he was absolutely excellent. And what happened is David has a new book out called American Injustice, and I was reading it. It's brilliant. It goes through the stories of why people can't get justice in the American legal system and why a lot of the time things which should be just and fair just aren't. They don't play in favour of those accused of crime. And it means 2 things. It means that innocent people get convicted, and it means that guilty people get away without punishment because innocent people are being convicted for things that they haven't done. So his book was fascinating, but part of the book I was particularly interested in and why I wanted to speak to him was about forced confessions. In the cases of the witch trials, of course, people confessed to things that they hadn't done. And he has a few great chapters on why people do that. So I thought it would be great to have him on to ask him about that, and also to ask him more generally about not only Salem, but about what it takes to have a fair trial.
Fantastic. And he's a really interesting guest. So his book has been described, so it's called American Injustice. It's been described as a searing critique of the way power is abused in America's criminal legal system based on first-hand experience. It's really, really fascinating and really disturbing. And it's just really horrifying when you look at all the ways in which a system that should be above and beyond reproach is so twisted, basically, and so against the favour and the odds of the people that are accused often. It's really, really horrifying. So he's a fantastic guest. And we started our discussions by asking David to introduce himself.
Yes, my name is David Rudolph, and I am a criminal defense lawyer and human rights, civil rights lawyer in the United States.
We're really delighted to have you on the podcast today. It's really great because, of course, we've mentioned already that you are in that fantastic documentary that came out, The Staircase. So I know that Claire and I, when we first met, we bonded over an interest in true crime and how that's represented. So we'd obviously both watched that. And we know a lot of our listeners will be very keen because there is definitely a crossover. Can you tell us what your new book is about and why it would appeal to listeners of the Witches of Scotland podcast, do you think?
Well, it's about a number of wrongful convictions, so it should certainly appeal to your listeners. And what I tried to do in the book was tell the stories of everyday people who were caught up in wrongful prosecutions and convictions, and to explain in human terms, not in technical terms, sort of what happened to those people, how it happened, why it happened, and hopefully to provide some insight into how we can prevent those sorts of things from happening in the future, or at least minimize the number of those that happen.
Yeah, it was quite horrifying when I was reading your book in preparation for this. Some of the statistics about people that have been released, who they've realised over the last several years were not guilty of what they were sent away for, and the amount of years of jail time that's all added up just for those people. And that's probably just the tip of the iceberg, that there'll be people across the states that are innocent and are in jail. It's really shocking to me because I'm not a lawyer, but really shocking to me that there was the one case in particular I was looking at where the person had been sent to jail and he'd put in numerous requests for DNA evidence and it just been ignored. And that the police are able to just kind of go, I'm not dealing with that. Or that people can be contacted and said, look, here's new evidence, and the police can just ignore it. I'm so shocked by that.
Well, you know, in the United States, at least, there's a great premium put on finality. The courts and prosecutors are somehow very frightened of the idea that something that has already been closed, so to speak, can be reopened and their motives or their conduct be put under a microscope. And so they talk about the fact that these can lead to opening the floodgates of other people complaining of these things. But you're absolutely right. The ones who have been exonerated are the tip of the iceberg, literally, because it's not easy to be exonerated in the United States because there's so much emphasis on finality. And so, you know, when the interest in finality trumps the interest in truth and justice, you end up with the sorts of problems we have in the United States.
Isn't it extraordinary? Exactly the same in Scotland. That finality is so important, and I don't get it. They say justice delayed is justice denied. Okay, I can understand that. If you have to wait a long time to get justice, you're not getting justice in the meantime. But why is it that it's all right that people who are innocent of crimes remain convicted, which also means that people who are guilty of them remain free?
Well, that's exactly right. And I think people fail to recognize the flip side of this whole issue. Because the truth of the matter is that everybody, including prosecutors and police, have the same interest in avoiding wrongful convictions as criminal defense lawyers and defendants do. You know, whenever somebody is wrongfully convicted, it means the actual perpetrator is free to go out and victimize other people. But somehow that gets lost in the debate over finality. And to be honest, I'm not sure why finality has been elevated to such a high level, because the system is a human system and humans make mistakes. So there is simply no reason to deny that some of these cases have merit. And so if a case does have merit, you know, there's just no reason to deny relief because of finality. And, you know, we did a podcast, the second season of our podcast, Abuse of Power, is about a British citizen who was convicted in Florida and has served decades in prison, although there is massive evidence that he is in fact innocent. But the courts that's not by itself a ground for relief. And that's sort of crazy to me. I mean, you ought to be able to come into court at any point, prove your innocence, and be released. But that's not the situation in the United States, at least.
And people would be absolutely amazed about that. Now, we want to ask you some quite specific things about part of your book, which I found really interesting, which were the chapters on confession evidence and false confessions. And they're really an excellent but quite harrowing read about false confessions. But first of all, we want to ask you about what was probably the most famous historic miscarriage of justice, which is the Salem witch trials. Now, when you're a student at university, were you taught about the Salem witch trials?
You know, we really weren't, but we should have been. It almost ought to start any course on criminal procedure and criminal law, because it's a classic example of how wrongful convictions occur. I did a little bit of research before coming on today so that I could understand a little bit better what happened during those Salem witch trials. And you're right, confessions were sort of the coin of the realm, if you will, with those trials. You know, if someone confessed, it appears as though that was a route to avoid being hanged. But if you didn't confess and you stood trial and the spectral evidence was such that, you know, the jury convicted you or the judges convicted you, you were hanged almost immediately. There was no appeal process, as best I could tell. So it's the original sin of wrongful conviction in the United States.
Isn't it? Because it's got the three things. It's got wrongful conviction in terms of getting people to confess to things that they haven't done by making the alternative worse. It's got expert evidence that was rubbish. So experts come in and give evidence, which then turns out to be fake expert evidence. And at least, though, in the US, what they had quite shortly after people were convicted was exonerations, which of course hasn't happened here at all.
Well, the exonerations seem to have been spurred by just the governor of Massachusetts, who apparently wasn't buying the tale that someone could be afflicted by a witch and then see the apparition of the person, and based on that could identify who had caused the affliction. He wasn't a believer in that. And so even after a number of these people were convicted, he pardoned them, refused to sanction their executions. And I think gradually that sort of led to an understanding. And then all of a sudden people were being found not guilty. You know, in many ways, and I don't know if you had this in Scotland, but, you know, in the early 90s, we had all these allegations of child sex abuse at various daycare centers. And it was really similar. I mean, these children made up these stories about daycare workers that were just fantastical. But there was sort of a hysteria that took place. And people were convicted and sentenced to long times in prison. And gradually, it turned out that none of this was true. And those people ended up being exonerated in some cases. History repeats itself, as we all know.
That's what I'm quite scared of. As a criminal defence lawyer, I think I look at the witch trials and I see that what they had there was proper trials. Like, it wasn't mob justice. They brought people before courts. They had evidence led, even if the expert evidence was rubbish, but they had evidence led, which people believed. They had witnesses, which people believed. So the structure of a proper trial there was there with the procedural safeguards that were there. But the difficulty is that if you fundamentally believe, I suppose, that these people were witches, you have what is still known this day as a bias towards simply believing what evidence supports it and ignoring what evidence doesn't.
Yes, to a certain extent, I agree with you, but I think the procedural protections were more imagined than real. What kind of trials were these? Were the accused represented by lawyers? I don't think so. Did they have any chance to cross-examine the alleged victims? No. Did they have any right of appeal? No. So there was sort of a patina. Yes, they had a, quote, trial, But it really was in some ways just sort of a mock trial. It was a kangaroo court in the truest sense. And once you were indicted, unless you confessed, I don't know that I read of anybody having been acquitted before the governor sort of stepped in and called bullshit on the trials.
And I think it was because the governor's wife became accused.
Exactly. And isn't that interesting?
It's like, well, I'll agree with all that witchcraft, but wait a minute, it's come to my door. So
exactly.
It's now rubbish. So one of the most important things in the witchcraft trials were confessions. And
I was just about to say the same thing. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I'm just, because you mentioned that there, David, your confession was mentioned, and we've talked a lot previously on the podcasts about the content of confessions and about how you can track that there are particular sort of tropes that appear in different parts of Scotland where, we know that there were publications that were put out at certain points that would detail the witches' confessions, and they were quite lurid, they were quite tabloid in some cases. But what some people keep coming back to, which is, at the time people came back to, which was, well, why, if you haven't done it, why would you ever confess? And I think that the chapter in your book, American Injustice, really goes into that and explains it very clearly why it is that people make false confessions. So could you maybe outline that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. It's simply a matter of human nature. People who can't imagine confessing to something that they didn't do are generally people who are sitting in their homes. They've not been subjected to any kind of pressure to say anything that's not true. But now let's imagine that you are, a young Black person in a rural town in North Carolina, and you've been accused of murdering somebody, and you know that the jury is going to be all white and they're going to be prejudiced against you. And you're not from that area, so that magnifies the prejudice, and you're facing the death penalty in the United States. Or, in Scotland, you're facing, decades and decades of prison, and someone comes to you and says, if you'll confess to doing X, we'll make sure that you're not sentenced to death. We'll make sure that you can get out in 10 years. And at that point, the pressure to confess to avoid having to face trial and a death penalty is pretty overwhelming. But let me make it even more basic. Let's suppose that you're accused of a minor crime and you're put in jail in the United States. Bail is set, and oftentimes poor people can't make bail. And so they're sitting in jail awaiting trial. They're at risk of losing their jobs, losing their house or apartment, losing their children. And now a prosecutor says to their lawyer, listen, if he wants a trial and he's going to insist on not guilty, I don't know when we're going to reach that trial. But if he'll plead to a lesser offense, we'll agree to a sentence of time served and he can be out today. Now, you're that poor person and you're faced with this choice. Plead guilty and you're out today, or insist on your innocence and we don't know when we'll reach your trial and you'll stay in jail until then. I think it's pretty clear that most people in that situation would plead guilty because they don't have a choice in a real sense. So what people need to understand are the pressures that are brought to bear on innocent people to falsely confess and even to falsely plead guilty because they're avoiding the greater danger. And it's a very rational decision. And so if you read the book, I think you'll understand that it's not strange at all that there's false confessions. And indeed, DNA exonerations has established that numerous people falsely confess and falsely plead guilty and then are exonerated by DNA evidence. So we can't deny that it happens. What we need to do is understand why it happens and eliminate those sorts of pressures.
And what you're talking about there is making a pragmatic decision based on trial times and time served and taking a plea bargain. That doesn't even touch on the idea of people being maltreated or mistreated into giving confessions. As they do
Absolutely.
witch trials.
Right. Of course, there are psychological pressures that are brought to bear. Police in the United States are trained in how to put sort of psychological pressure on people to admit things, to get out from under the burden of being interrogated. They're taught to separate people from their family, to separate them from lawyers, to create a sort of alternative explanation that is less blameworthy. Oh, you must have been drunk. You may not remember it. Perhaps you blacked out. And so they create these scenarios where it just becomes easier for the person to say, yeah, that may be what happened, than to continue to insist that they didn't do it and undergo more and more hours of interrogation. So it's all of those things, but there is absolutely no question that innocent people confess to things they didn't do and plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit. Indeed, there are instances where people have confessed to murdering somebody and then the person shows up alive, months or years later.
It's like a film. I mean, you can't even believe that would even happen.
It has happened.
And how does a lawyer such as yourself go about, or is it even possible to try and reform the system so that there's a move towards fairness?
Well, I think in Great Britain and England, at least, police have moved away from using the sorts of interrogation techniques that are used in the United States. So that is some improvement. In addition to that, obviously, the whole notion of plea bargaining and rewarding people for pleading guilty is a major cause of wrongful convictions and false confessions. So, you need to eliminate now, should somebody receive some credit for having accepted responsibility for what they did? Sure. But the way the system is working in the United States, at least, is that the disparity between what someone gets if they plead guilty and what someone receives as a sentence if they go to trial and lose has become obscene. At this point, sometimes it's a difference of decades and decades of prison. If you admit to this, you'll be out in 5 years. If you go to trial and you're convicted, you're going to serve 50 years. And so when the disparity is that great, the pressure to falsely confess to something or falsely plead guilty to something simply to avoid the consequences of going to trial and losing is irresistible. And so we have in the United States what we call the trial penalty. If you go to trial and you lose, you're sentenced infinitely more severely than if you plead guilty and admit that you did something. By itself, it creates an enormous incentive for people to plead guilty to things they didn't do.
And how much of this is encouraged because of the money, the private prisons make and so on?
I don't know that is a huge factor, to be honest. That's a whole other problem that we can discuss some other time. But look, let's go back to the Salem witch trials. You had exactly the same situation. All of these women, not just confessing to things that they didn't do, but then pointing the finger at other people. And then those people refusing to confess. So the people who confess and falsely accuse others, they're not educated, they're not executed. But the people who refuse to confess, who say they're not guilty, are the ones who are executed. It's the same dynamic.
And once those people confessed, and we know that confessions are the strongest forms of evidence you can have because they are against your self-interest, again, as you talk about in the book. Once people have confessed to something, even in the face of substantial evidence to show that they haven't done it, pretty much just short of the person that they have confessed to murdering turning up alive, the legal system, once again, really doesn't like the idea of you being able to challenge that.
Well, partly is they don't like the idea that false confessions occur. because it sort of indicts the whole system, doesn't it? Obviously there's something wrong with the system if it is encouraging people or causing people to falsely confess. So by recognizing that happens, in essence, you're recognizing that the system has some fundamental flaw. And I think that's a part of it, along with the notion of finality. And if we're going to start allowing people who plead guilty to come in and say they're not, the floodgates are going to open. Everybody who's in prison is going to be coming forward and saying, I really didn't mean it. I'm not guilty.
That's really interesting. So if you plead guilty in America, are you not allowed to appeal against your conviction? Because that's the situation in Scotland.
No, you're not. If you plead guilty, as a matter of fact, you have to waive in many jurisdictions, you have to waive your right to challenge the conviction going forward by pleading guilty.
What if somebody pleads guilty and at the time they were having like a mental problem, or they were coming off drugs, or whatever? There's no facility for you afterwards to say, look, I was in a bad place then, I would like to take back what I said.
There's a carve out in these waivers if either the lawyer representing the person was providing ineffective assistance of counsel, or if there were circumstances that indicated the person was not competent to enter the plea. But those are huge hurdles to get over. Truly huge. So for all intents and purposes, once you plead guilty in the United States, you're pretty much done. Now, there have been some movements recently for innocence commissions to look at cases, even where people have pled guilty. And I think there's increasing recognition that a guilty plea does not mean that there aren't issues to look at. But for the vast, vast majority of people, the guilty plea is sort of the end of the line.
Now, I just want to check if that also relates to Alfred pleas, because I know that you sort of came to general world prominence, I should say, when Netflix showed The Staircase. But for those of us that are interested in true crime, we knew about it years ago. We'd followed the documentary and seen you there. But we understand that the person who was convicted of the crime in The Staircase did so by his own hand, by pleading guilty in an Alfred plea. That's a plea where it says, I don't accept my guilt, but I see that there's evidence which a jury could accept and find me guilty. Is that right?
It's essentially that. And when I spoke about Alfred pleas in Scotland, the barristers who were on the panel with me were absolutely appalled that I would allow my client to enter a plea of guilty when he was maintaining his innocence. Donald Finley was on some of the panels with me, and Don was just appalled. He said he would never, ever do that. And so I guess our system in the United States is a little bit more pragmatic and less principled, if you will, because I have no problem if somebody wants to avoid the risk of trial, or if somebody just doesn't want to fight anymore because they're just spent emotionally, physically, financially. As long as the result is something that I think is beneficial for the client and the client wants to do that, I don't have a problem helping them do that. But I'm not sure that would go over very well in your system.
Well, we do think that is really unusual, but I'm actually really coming round to the idea of it, to allow people to do that if that's what they want to do. But in those circumstances, can those people appeal their convictions if you plead guilty in an Alfred plea, or is it just...
No, they're treated exactly the same as a guilty plea. It's just, it's an alternative. It's a very pragmatic American way of dealing with the pressures of plea bargaining. And, I guess, if you don't have a trial penalty, if someone is not punished more severely by going to trial than by not, perhaps there's less incentive to allow Alfred pleas. But it's simply a recognition by the U.S. justice system that, there are times when somebody just doesn't want to go through the trial, but is unwilling to say that they murdered somebody or committed some other crime. And so it's a sort of jury-rigged way of getting to a particular result.
Now, I know that your whole career has dealt with miscarriage of justice, but you've kind of shifted focus from dealing with the trial process to dealing with the civil process that happens thereafter, getting recompense, compensation for people who have been wrongly convicted. Now, in a sense, the Witches of Justice campaign is trying to restore people's names to them.
The Witches of Scotland campaign. It's not the Witches of Justice. Sounds like a Marvel spin-off.
I call it the Witches of Justice. I like
You
the
did.
Witches.
Yeah. Claire,
Call it
quickly,
the Witches of
write that
Justice.
down.
Write that down. Copyright it. The Witches of Scotland campaign is a justice-led campaign. So many people, when we have articles written, people go, "Oh, are you trying to get compensation? Why bother? It's 100 years old. They can't get compensation for it." And we're like, we know we can't get compensation. We're just trying to do what we can to say that those people weren't guilty and to record properly that they suffered a terrible miscarriage of justice, and to, I suppose, give them their name back as people who were wrongly convicted. That's obviously something you care deeply about. Can you explain to us why that is, why you think it's important that people should have their name restored to them?
Well, I'll give you an example. And it's one of the stories in the book. It's about Tim Bridges. And Tim was wrongfully convicted. He was eventually exonerated. And we actually secured a significant amount of money for him from the city of Charlotte. But the most important thing to Tim was that the governor of North Carolina met with him in determining whether he was going to be granted a pardon of innocence. And he and I went to the governor's office, and the governor spent about an hour with Tim, talking to him and understanding what had happened. And towards the end of it, the governor turned to Tim and he said, "I just want you to know that I am really sorry that this happened to you. And I apologize to you for what you went through." And Tim told me afterwards that that was much more meaningful and important to him than the amount of money that we were able to secure for him, because it was a recognition by the government, by the entity that had prosecuted him, that he was not guilty. And that was just so important to him in letting him rebuild his life. And so, yes, these people have been dead for many, many, many centuries. And yes, they're not going to know that their name has been restored. But it's important, I think, just for the concept of justice, that we all recognize that this is what happened to these people, and they didn't deserve what happened to them. And we need to publicly acknowledge that they were wrongfully convicted and executed in many cases. And whether their descendants are still living or not, whether they even know that they're descended from these people or not, there's a greater benefit, a societal interest, if you will, in righting a wrong that has occurred. And so I think it's always, always important for the health of society for us to recognize when we've done wrong and to apologize in some form or fashion for what we've done. And I think that's the importance of your campaign.
That's really lovely to hear that you're a supporter of it. Now, the Witches of Scotland campaign is looking for a national memorial. What do you think of the idea about memorials and statues in relation to miscarriages of justice?
You know, I think that things like the Vietnam War Memorial in the United States, you know, I've been there. I've been to the September 11th Memorial in New York City, you know, where it's just water sort of pouring into this whole, you know, infinity. And they are just incredibly moving testaments to what happened. And they make you think, and they make you reflect on the meaning of whatever the event is. There's a similar memorial in Alabama that Ryan Stevenson created for the victims of lynchings in the South. These are things that, as I describe it, I get goosebumps because they make these issues come alive for people. They force people to think. And so do I think just putting up a plaque is enough? No, I don't think that's enough. I think there needs to be a memorial, some sort of a monument, if you will, that has meaning in and of itself, that epitomizes what happened. I don't know, whether it's some sort of eternal cauldron, that calls forth what happened to people who were burned at the stake, for being witches, but something that epitomizes and dramatizes and causes people to really think about the horror of what this was is really essential as part of the healing process. And so I fully support the idea of doing something like that as part of your campaign.
Good. Yeah. That's what we were having a conversation earlier, Claire and myself, about what it might be like. And we were thinking that we want to have something that's provocative, that provokes people, and
Right.
This is what humans sometimes do. We need to be aware of that so that we don't do the same things again.
What they've done in the United States with these projects is they've put them out to artists, and sought proposals.
That's what we'd hope to see here. Yeah.
Yeah, and artists are just fantastic at coming up with ways of illustrating, things that we have trouble putting into words. So, I would encourage you to do that. Maybe you reach out to Brian in Alabama and see what how he came up with his concept, or reach out to the people who create the 9/11 memorial. It's just all the names of the people, and there's these pools of water, and there's just water pouring into. It's really mind-boggling how it evokes what happened on that day and the enormity of it, and the evilness of it. So I'd really encourage you all to reach out to artists and those who have done this before. The woman who designed the memorial, the Vietnam Memorial, is, she's an amazing artist. So there are some people, I think, and I'm sure there are similar people in Scotland and the UK who are willing to give that some real thought and, commission something that's really thought-provoking, as you said.
One thing that I think, when reading your book, David, I was reading through it, and it's all about modern miscarriages of justice, relatively modern miscarriages of justice. But we see the same themes running through those miscarriages of justice as we do from hundreds of years ago. And what we try and do in the Witches of Scotland podcast, and what we try and do when we speak to people, is let people know that miscarriages of justice, like what happened to those people on a huge scale, a grand scale, aren't things of the past. And there are still miscarriages of justice happening today, including people around the world that are still being accused of witchcraft. The book shows so eloquently miscarriages of justice of the past are also the same type of miscarriage of justice that we have in the present day. So I think it's a real cautionary tale for people, and I think it's really important that people read your book and see how these things still happen in the modern world.
Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for joining us again for our 58th episode of the Witches of Scotland podcast. It would be great to see as many of you as possible on the 21st of May in Glasgow for that live event with Jenny Fagan talking about Hex. As ever, please look for us, if you're not already, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. Claire's 2 TikToks. Any way you'd like to get in touch with us, that'd be great. Twitter is the best place because we can have a bit of a chat with you there. And if we don't see you on Saturday, we'll hope to see you at another event, won't we, Claire?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the world's opening up again now, and we're getting more and more offers of coming to do talks. Our difficulty is just that we're both working so hard at our other jobs, and we've both got a lot of commitments. But one really exciting thing coming up, we'll put in the news a bit later, is that later on at the end of June, we're going down to the British Library to do a talk.
Oh, yeah. We are.
Yeah.
Keep forgetting about these things that we've got coming up. Yes, we are. That's very exciting, actually. That's cool. That's June, though. Got to get May dealt with first.
Yeah, get out of the way. And Zoe, see, because like 60 is coming up soon for our podcast, do we get a cake? I don't know. You just, talk about making.
We should get a cake. It's actually my son's birthday, and I need to bake a cake this afternoon. But we might want to get a professional cake for you and I.
Maybe this is insensitive to talk about cakes when it's David's birthday and he's audioing this.
Sorry, David.
David's
probably not into cakes anyway.
Yeah, I think he probably is into cakes.
Okay. David, we'll take you for a cup of tea and a cake as soon as possible.
The thing is, I mean, it's so important. I was saying this to people at Brechin, that we want to make this free because we want as many people as possible to know about it and get to speak to the great experts. But it is very, very kind of David to give of his time to do that. So David also has the Buy Me a Coffee, which we'll put up links to. So if you are feeling generous, if you do like the podcast, if you spend your time listening to it, if you talk to people about it, please do remember that someone's giving his time who isn't actually involved in the Witches of Scotland for free to do it, and buy him a coffee. Just imagine if you saw him in real life and he said, yeah, I do the Witches of Scotland. You're like, hey, have a coffee. Why not? Did that good advert? No.
I thought that was quite good. Yeah, it had a slight, I don't know if it's just me, it had a slight mafia undertone, the way you went there.
Oh, no.
Hey, give me a coffee.
Do you think there was an implicit threat there? Because that was
no. It was just a kind of an insouciant sort of Italian American mobster vibe.
Was it my shrug of the shoulders? You can't.
Yeah, and obviously the listeners can't see that, but you just kind of went, hey, I'll buy a coffee.
Hey,
I'll buy you a coffee. Sorry, everybody that's listening in America.
Sorry, everyone. Sorry, everyone that's listening anywhere for that.
Yeah, it's too much. Okay, adios, amigo.
Bye.
Bye.
If you'd like to learn more about the Witches of Scotland, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our mailing list at www.witchesofscotland.com to keep updated with the campaign. On that site, you'll be able to find how to link with us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.